Could a sexless long-term marriage be a reason for sex addiction?
Can I go first?
You can go first. I know your answer.
No. No. And okay, so now here's my long version, right? A sexless marriage, yes, that may, if it's not both people's choice together, that could have many difficulties and problems and stuff to talk about. However, sexlessness does not create addiction. In someone's mind, it might be their rationale justification to continue an addictive behavior or poor decision making or bad judgment. But sexless marriage does not mean that is the cause of an addiction. Addictions usually start so much earlier, in the emotional landscape of what's going on.
Well,
so that's my first. What do you guys think?
Well, I heard this question different. I heard, is sexlessness a reason for sex addiction? So what I heard was, if I'm in a sexless marriage, does that mean that my partner's sex addicted? That's what I heard. And I would say, if your partner is not interested in sex, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're acting out with other sexual content.
Oh, so you were saying if we're not having sex, does that automatically mean that someone is either addicted to sex or betraying vows and such, like stepping out?
Right, that's what I heard.
Oh, how interesting. It's not what I heard. What
Right.
about you guys? What did you hear, Dan?
I heard it. I went two different ways. I could see someone, on the one hand, let's say for whatever reason, the partner or the relationship, for whatever reason, there's some issue. They're not having sex, or they're not able to, or they, it's ceased on some level, that like a justification for the betrayer to go outside the relationship. I heard that. But what I would most likely, what I do see is what I would imagine this is about probably more intimacy anorexia. That's what I see, or sexual anorexia. So I don't know. We can go down that road. I'd love to talk about that for a second if we can.
Anorexia?
Sexual anorexia. Patrick Carnes talked about sexual anorexia. Doug Weiss is the first person I've heard talk about intimacy anorexia as the pervasive pattern of withholding in the relationship. And I usually see those men, typically men I've worked with this, they'll tend to be very afraid of rejection. So they'll stay pretty guarded. They're very hypersensitive to criticism. They'll kind of be guarded, very walled up and guarded. They'll kind of keep their partner at bay. So, and they'll do things where they'll kind of invite connection, but then push the partner away. And in those cases, I see those men may very well act out with porn and masturbation as a substitute for sexuality that they're not taking risks for, or they're not engaging in the relationship. So I do see that happen a lot. It's not the sexlessness that caused the addiction. I would say it's a bigger, more pervasive problem of the intimacy disorder that sex addiction is. So I don't know what you guys are hearing, but that's what I would see it as.
We know that sex addiction has its roots in childhood, has its roots in trauma, and has its roots in the neurology that gets wired into their brain as they're managing their trauma, and they have found sexual behaviors as a way to take the edge off and to not be overwhelmed by their trauma. So sexlessness in a marriage, from my perspective, is absolutely not something that causes sex addiction. I do think that there's an interesting question, which is it the chicken or the egg? Is it that there's sexlessness in the marriage and that sexlessness is coming from some reason? Or I've also seen many times, addicts, like Wendy was saying, it's not, if you're in a sexless marriage, it doesn't mean your partner's a sex addict, but sometimes it does. Sometimes the addicts are taking their sexual behavior outside. Sometimes addicts have an attachment wound where they're unable to combine sexual eroticism and relational connection. And so they have to be in a relationship with the Madonna, but they act out with the horror, and they separated those two things. But also, I've worked with many partners whose libido is just sort of naturally shut down, and they weren't aware of why and they weren't happy with it, but it was a self-protection mechanism from feeling objectified by the addict. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but my simple answer is no, a sexless marriage does not cause sex addiction.